Hi, I'm Kathleen Foran, and this is episode 3 of the Grad podcast, where I speak with second-year students about their thesis projects. Today, I'm with Mathew Nazarian from the Digital Futures program. Thanks for coming in, Mathew. To begin, would you mind sharing what drew you to the Digital Futures program at OCAD?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. The Digital Futures program is pretty unique, I think, because the people in the program come from like so many different backgrounds. The programming that is sort of in place is really good to help people kind of focus on what they want to focus on in their own research. So it's not like everyone is constrained to do something specific. The program does involve like a making and like practical approach to problem solving and research, which is really nice. So a lot of the individuals who come into the program, they are designers or architects by background, but it's really open to anyone who is interested in like making and kind of research by design and research through making. So yeah, it's a really cool program.
And your background before was in sciences?
Yes, so I was at McMaster before, and I was in sciences, and I kind of, at the time, I wanted to do something a little different, but I wasn't sure what. So when I came across the Digital Futures program, I was intrigued because I saw this program and I saw like all these different things that I could do, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. Let me learn more about this. So yeah, I kind of took some like courses in like UX design and did a little like self-learning and
Before you applied?
yeah, before I applied, exactly.
Okay, so you created a bridge for yourself.
Exactly, because I know one of the things that is required is like a portfolio, and I didn't really have like that much stuff in a portfolio. Like I had done some web design stuff, so it was really cool because making the portfolio actually got me to sort of look at different tools and stuff. For example, like I wanted to like learn like 3D modeling because I didn't really have a background in that, but I knew if I wanted to sort of transition into design, it would be like extremely helpful to have. So one of my projects on my portfolio was like an exploration in 3D modeling. And I think like the committee that looks over the portfolios were like really interested in that, because I remember they said, show us stuff that like makes you, or show us stuff that tells us about you in a way that like you can sort of, I don't know, show through the work, if that makes sense. Like the work sort of shows who you are. So for example, like I put one of my like science papers in, which was cool that they like allowed me to do that. And yeah, kind of the rest of the stuff, like I had done some work in like game development as well. So I had a little app that I made that I put in as well, and it was really cool because that kind of brings me to like my main focus now, which is like game design and narrative design. So yeah, I don't know, it's helped me move towards where I am now in a way that I didn't think was possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so putting the portfolio together kind of gave you a direction that you've been able to like continue to explore in the degree.
Yeah.
And how did the courses that you took in your first year inform your research? Did, I guess, that initial application, how did that like continue to evolve in the first year?
Yeah, so the courses, I know we were talking about this earlier, but the courses in the first year are like really good, I found, for giving you like a strong foundation to pursue what you want to do. I know a lot of people come into the program and some might have like a really hyper-focused goal of what they want to achieve, but I know for the most part, everyone's kind of like coming in with, I want to look at this and I want to look at this. And, I don't necessarily have the know-how, for example, how to do that. But those first year courses are like pretty helpful in giving you those skills. Like one of our courses is called Creation and Computation, and the projects range from like physical computing to there's like some coding stuff. There's, working with like AI. So they kind of touch on all the new and like emerging technologies and stuff that are coming out in a way that is easy to like start learning and accessible for someone who might not necessarily have a background in that to begin. So yeah.
That's so helpful. Yeah, because like even just hearing like technologies we mentioned, I'm like, oh, that sounds so complicated, but to like be able to break it down and make it accessible.
Yeah.
And can you walk us through the game that you've designed for your thesis?
Yeah, of course. So the game that I designed for my thesis, well, actually, I should back up by saying when I was looking into doing a thesis, I wasn't really, sure what to do, but actually in the application process for the program, you have to write a research proposal for what you think you would work on for your thesis. So for the longest time, I've always been interested in storytelling. And I mean, storytelling in games is such a key aspect of like so many games. There are some that are just sort of tailored towards the story, like all the other mechanics are secondary towards that. And yeah, stories are, I find like really interesting in how people tell them. So I was thinking of initially trying to see how, AI, which is such a huge emerging technology that everybody is, talking about, like how could I bridge that with narrative design or storytelling in games? So that was kind of my initial research proposal, and then I sort of moved along, and through my classes in like the creation and computation course and like learning different skills and working with different technologies, I finally settled on creating a platform which I called StoryForge, which is like the focus of my thesis. And what it does is it uses local large language models to turn storybooks into text adventure games. So I settled on text adventure games because they are unique among games in that really the main driver is like the story. So if I wanted to approach implementing, artificial intelligence in the narrative design process for games, I figured I should start like at the very beginning, because some of the earliest video games were these like interactive fiction or text adventure games, and they really didn't have many visuals, or you really had to create an engaging story for people to want to play your games because they didn't have much to work with back then. So I kind of figured, this is like the best, like almost vehicle to approach this. And with the platform, the way that I designed it is that right now it's trained on just one story, which is the Mutiny of the H.M.S. Bounty, a book I was reading at the time I first started developing it, but it's about like a 19th century revolt on a British sailing ship. So it's a little obscure, but the story actually lends itself really well to this format because it has the plot points in the story allow the like language model for some reason to like latch onto those specific plot points really well and iterate on them in a way that's like very consistent.
Okay.
So yeah, honestly, the whole process has been really interesting, kind of looking at how these large language models behave when you feed them stories, because the models by themselves, they have a generative nature, so they want to like increase the randomness of your text when you feed them, because it's like that's how they create like a dynamic output. So my biggest challenge was keeping them constrained to follow the Mutiny of the Bounty, to stay true to that story in a way that you could play the game or play through the book multiple times and still kind of reach the ending in a similar way. So yeah, it's been pretty interesting, I would say.
And when we were speaking earlier, you mentioned that there are two modes that a user can do, and one of them is kind of follow the narrative,
Right,
and the
right.
other is to choose the more generative option.
Yeah, that's correct. So, like, as I was developing it, the original goal was to just keep it grounded to the story. And the way that I figured out how to do that was I took a summary of the Mutiny on the Bounty, which again can be swapped out for any book. So, for example, you can take like the Philosopher's Stone, like the first Harry Potter book. But the summary is then checked by the large language model every single time the user requests like an output from the model. So what this does is it basically looks like you start the game, it generates the first response, which is like, welcome to the Mutiny of the H.M.S. Bounty. You were on board and I don't know, the seagulls are flying above and like you're off the coast of Tahiti. You have 3 options, 1, 2, 3 or 4 options. What do you want to do? So say I wanted to click like option 2, then for the first mode, which sort of keeps it grounded to the story, the model would check that summary of the story before returning an answer. And that happens every time. And I've called that one story mode because it's, in line with keeping to the story. So as the user progresses through the game, the model will return and keep checking that story card, which is the summary of the story, to make sure that it keeps those outputs relatively consistent in line with the plot of that book. The second mode is called Forge mode. The name was an interesting problem to have. I thought it would be kind of cool to reference something that is like creating something from nothing, or working on something in a way that like reshapes it. So that's why I kind of picked Forge, because a blacksmith kind of like remolds the material. But the second mode basically kind of uses the same mechanics as the first mode, where a user can play through the book, but the sort of guide rails or constraints are dropped in a way that lets the player have more agency and the model take into account their decisions more. So the ending might be different from how you expect it to be based on how the story was written. But it also allows for like new narrative possibilities, and it really lets you sort of stretch the plot and explore alternate possibilities. So for example, I know I'm using the bounty as the main story for the platform, but if we're going to take Harry Potter, just because I know a lot of people are familiar with it, imagine for the first one that at the end when they're playing Wizard's Chess in the basement of the castle, Ron did something that made them lose the chess game. And then okay, how would they figure that out? How would they move from there? So just kind of working with the plot in a way that lets you sort of reshape it in a way that maybe you would want to see happen. What if you had a question about something I always wondered, what would happen if, for example, Harry didn't catch the golden snitch or something, kind of general examples, but that's kind of the interesting feature of the second mode, the Forge mode. So these two modes kind of together make up the platform, which is StoryForge. And yeah.
I hope you do make a second iteration based on Harry Potter.
Yeah, I know.
Sounds fascinating. Well, thanks so much for sharing your research with us. The game will be on display at the Digital Futures Thesis exhibition at the end of March at the Waterfront campus. So go check it out to see the game up close, and stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you guys for watching.